In the silence of a courtroom, a single act of cruelty exposed a system built on unchecked power. When Officer Reeves ripped a silver pendant from a young man's neck, he had no idea the quiet woman watching from behind the bench was the boy's mother, Judge Elena Martinez. What followed wasn't just justice served, it was a reckoning that would change everything. The morning sun filtered through the blinds as Jamal Martinez buttoned up his shirt, his hands trembling slightly. Not from fear exactly, but from something heavier. 17 years old, bright and thoughtful, Jamal had always been the kind of person who observed more than he spoke. Today wasn't supposed to be a big deal, just a court date for a minor incident at school, a misunderstanding over a damaged classroom door that a teacher had blamed on him without evidence. His public defender had said it would be quick, 20 minutes tops. Still, Jamal dressed like it mattered, pressed shirt, clean jeans, and around his neck, a simple silver pendant. The pendant wasn't flashy or thick, but it was precious. It had belonged to his father, Miguel Martinez, a paramedic who died helping victims of a highway pileup 3 years earlier. The pendant had been in Miguel's pocket that day, bent and scratched in the accident, but later cleaned and restored by Jamal's grandfather. It was the only thing they could recover. Jamal didn't wear it to make a statement, he wore it to remember, to keep his father close, especially in moments when the world felt colder than usual. He glanced at himself in the mirror, straightened the pendant against his chest, and took a deep breath. "Ready?" a voice called from the living room. It was his grandfather, Roberto Martinez, 76 years old and still walking with the quiet dignity of a man who'd seen too much but said too little. He stood by the front door, leaning lightly on a carved wooden cane, his fedora sitting squarely on his head. Roberto was a Vietnam vet, a retired postal worker, and the type of man who believed in looking people in the eye, no matter who they were. Jamal gave a small nod and joined him. They didn't speak much on the ride over. The courthouse loomed ahead like a giant stone reminder of who held the cards, tall pillars, imposing steps, metal detectors waiting at the entrance. As they approached, Roberto reached out and rested a hand gently on Jamal's shoulder. "Just keep your head high," he said, his voice calm but steady. "We aren't here to bow." Jamal nodded. He understood. He always had. Inside, the halls buzzed with quiet tension. Lawyers rushed past with files under their arms. A janitor mopped near the elevator. A couple in business suits whispered anxiously on a bench. Jamal and Roberto found their way to a long wooden pew just outside the courtroom. The air was cold, like all the warmth had been drained out by the weight of everything that happened inside those walls. Jamal kept his back straight, hands folded in his lap, but his fingers kept brushing against the pendant at his chest, like it was a tether to something real. Every time he touched it, it was like his father was there. With him, standing behind him. Not many people understood that kind of thing, but Jamal didn't care if they did. He noticed a few glances. People always looked at him a certain way, too tall, too serious, too quiet. Sometimes that silence made them nervous, but Jamal knew how to carry himself. His mother had taught him that. Even though she hadn't made it to court yet, he knew she would. Roberto sat beside him in silence, his cane resting between his knees, hat still on, eyes watching every movement around them. He didn't like this place, not because of what it looked like, but because of what it stood for, what it had meant for men like him his whole life. He'd been thrown in the back of a patrol car for nothing more than asking why. He'd watched friends lose jobs, homes, and even family because someone with a badge said so. But today wasn't about him. It was about Jamal. A door creaked open across the hallway. Jamal looked up, expecting to see his lawyer. Instead, what he saw made his stomach turn just a little. A courthouse officer had stepped out, broad-shouldered and stiff in his uniform. Officer Richard Reeves. Jamal didn't know his name yet, but he'd know his face forever. Reeves scanned the hallway like a man looking for trouble to claim, and when his eyes landed on Jamal, they narrowed just a second, just enough. Jamal felt it, that look, that weight, that unspoken challenge. He sat still, said nothing, but the pendant at his chest suddenly felt warmer. Reeves didn't say a word, just stood there watching for a beat too long before walking past. Jamal exhaled slowly. Roberto had noticed it too. His eyes followed Reeves down the hall and then returned to Jamal with a look that said everything: stay calm, stay still. But something had shifted. Neither of them could quite name it yet, because they hadn't seen the storm coming. Not yet. But it was already on its way. It was quiet in the courthouse hallway, too quiet. Jamal shifted slightly on the bench, feeling the chill from the floor creep through his shoes. His grandfather hadn't moved, just sat beside him like a statue, unmoved and unshaken, eyes locked ahead like a man watching the horizon for signs of trouble. And trouble wasn't far. Down the hallway, footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, the kind that didn't rush because they didn't have to. The kind that belonged to someone who thought the whole world ought to move for him. That's when he appeared again. Officer Richard Reeves, 55 years old, with a stiff back and a jaw like he was biting on a nail. His badge caught the light as he moved, the letters on his chest reading court officer in all caps, like he was trying to yell it without saying a word. He had the look of someone who'd been doing this job way too long without ever being told no. The kind of man who didn't see people, just categories, just boxes, just types. And when his eyes landed on Jamal again, they locked in, not curiosity, not confusion, just something uglier. Jamal felt it like a weight pressing against his chest. He didn't move, didn't look away. His hands rested in his lap, but his fingers almost instinctively found their way back to the pendant under his shirt. The cool metal against his skin was the only thing grounding him at that moment. Reeves stepped closer. There wasn't a reason, not a legal one anyway. Jamal wasn't doing anything wrong, wasn't saying anything, just sitting. But that didn't seem to matter. Reeves stopped just a few feet away. He looked Jamal over like he was sizing him up, like he saw something offensive in the way this Latino boy was sitting, too calm, too proud, too still. "You waiting on something?" Reeves finally asked, his voice low and sharp like broken glass under a boot. Jamal didn't answer right away. He glanced up briefly, then returned his eyes to the floor in front of him. "My court hearing," he said evenly, respectful but not timid. Reeves's mouth twitched. "Yeah? What's the charge?" Jamal turned slightly. "It's a misunderstanding." "Uh-huh." Reeves looked him over again, slower this time, his eyes settling right on the pendant peeking out from under Jamal's collar, a simple silver glint, but somehow that was enough. "Pretty bold for a kid like you," Reeves muttered, tilting his head. "Walking in here wearing something that flashy." Jamal didn't respond. He didn't have to. The air between them had already shifted. Roberto looked up now, slow and deliberate, his hand tightening slightly around the handle of his cane. He didn't say a word, but his eyes spoke volumes. Reeves ignored him. "You steal that?" he asked suddenly, with the same tone he might have used to ask the time of day, like it was a natural thing to assume, like it made perfect sense to him. Jamal blinked. "What?" Reeves nodded toward the pendant. "That. Where'd you get it?" Jamal sat up straighter now. His throat tightened, but his voice stayed level. "It was my dad's." Reeves's smirk grew. "Was it, though?" Roberto let out a breath, not loud but deep, the kind of exhale a man releases when he's trying very hard not to say what's burning inside him. Jamal looked Reeves in the eyes. "Yeah," he said. "It was." But Reeves wasn't hearing him, not really. He was already moving closer, not fast, not aggressive, but with that creeping kind of confidence, the kind that comes from a man who thinks he's untouchable. He leaned down slightly, his voice lowering. "You don't get it, do you?" Jamal said nothing, his hands clenched. "A kid like you," Reeves continued, "wearing something like that. That pendant don't belong on your neck." Jamal's jaw locked, his heart thumped in his chest a beat too loud, but he stayed still. "Where I come from," Reeves muttered, "you got to earn something like that." Roberto stood up slowly. "He did," he said, calm but firm. Reeves turned his head, annoyed. "You got a problem, old man?" Roberto didn't flinch. "No, but looks like you do." The two locked eyes for a long second. Reeves didn't say anything back. He just looked away and turned back to Jamal. That pendant still gleamed under the courthouse lights, and something about it, maybe what it meant, maybe who it belonged to, just seemed to gnaw at Reeves. He straightened up and took a step back. "You know what?" he said with a shrug. "Don't matter. We'll sort it out inside." And with that, he walked off, boots loud against the tile. But even as he left, Jamal could still feel his gaze burning in the back of his neck. Roberto sat down again, slow, steady. "You good?" he asked. Jamal nodded, but barely. "Yeah." But he wasn't. Not really. Because he knew the look Reeves gave him. He'd seen it before. And something told him it wasn't over. It was just starting. The wooden bench creaked softly beneath Jamal as he shifted, his body tense. That officer Reeves had walked off, but his words lingered in the air like smoke. Jamal felt it in his chest, in the way his breath wouldn't quite settle. The courthouse was quiet again, but not peaceful. It was that kind of quiet where something was about to break. From the corner of his eye, Jamal could see Reeves reappear down the hallway, now speaking with another officer near the courtroom door. He was laughing, loud enough to echo, loud enough to remind everyone that he didn't care who was listening. Jamal glanced down at the silver pendant resting against his chest. His fingers instinctively touched it, like they always did when he needed a second to breathe, to focus, to remember. That pendant had been through hell. It had survived the highway crash that took his father's life. It had been bent, scratched, almost destroyed, but still here, still whole. Like him. The courtroom door finally opened, and a bailiff stepped out, calling his name. Jamal Martinez. Jamal stood, nodded, then turned to his grandfather, who gave him a small nod in return, his silent way of saying, "You got this." The two of them moved toward the door together, but before they could cross the threshold, Reeves stepped forward. Jamal barely had time to react. Reeves's hand shot out, not to guide him, not to search him, but to grab him. Specifically, to grab the pendant. "What did I tell you?" Reeves growled under his breath. "This ain't yours." And then it happened. With a sharp tug, he ripped the pendant from Jamal's neck. The metal snapped against his skin, the clasp giving way with a metallic crack. It wasn't just the sound that cut, it was the suddenness, the violation, the way it happened so fast, so carelessly, as if it meant nothing. Jamal froze. The hallway gasped. Even the bailiff flinched. Reeves held the pendant up like a trophy, his fingers dangling it by the chain, letting it swing lazily in the air. "Looks stolen to me," he muttered, not to Jamal but loud enough for everyone around them to hear. Jamal's hand rose slowly to his neck. The skin stung where the pendant had been yanked away, not enough to bleed, but enough to burn. "That's mine," he said quietly, his voice even but shaking. "It's my dad's." Reeves scoffed. "Sure it is." Roberto stepped forward now, his cane tapping with urgency. "Hey," he snapped. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Reeves turned with a fake smile. "Just doing my job, sir. This kid shows up to court wearing jewelry like that? Looks a little suspicious to me." Jamal's jaw clenched. "You didn't ask. You didn't even give me a chance to explain." Reeves ignored him. He pocketed the pendant like it was nothing, turning toward the courtroom. "I'll log it as evidence," he called back over his shoulder. "If it's yours, you'll get it back." The door closed behind him. Jamal stood there, stunned. The world had tilted sideways in one violent second, and nobody had stopped it, not the other officer, not the people sitting nearby, not the bailiff, who now awkwardly motioned for Jamal to follow. Roberto shook his head in disbelief, his voice low but fierce. "They let that happen," he muttered. "They just let it happen." Jamal stepped into the courtroom, the air colder than the hallway, the lights above too bright, too white. The judge hadn't entered yet. The room was in that strange limbo before the storm, where everything looked official but nothing had started. Reeves stood near the prosecution table, laughing again, leaning casually against a chair like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just humiliated a boy in front of his own grandfather, like he hadn't just stolen something sacred. Jamal took a seat at the defense table. His lawyer, a young woman he barely knew, leaned in and whispered, "Everything okay?" He wanted to say no. He wanted to say that something had just been taken from him, again, that something small but meaningful had been stripped from his neck in front of a room full of people who did nothing. But he just nodded, because what was the point? Roberto sat behind him in the gallery, shoulders tight, eyes burning holes into the side of Reeves's head. The room filled slowly, lawyers, clerks, 2 more officers. Reeves still had the pendant, still hadn't said a word about where it came from. Jamal watched him, and with every passing second, his stomach tightened, not from fear, but from something else. Anger. Shame. Disbelief. A dangerous mix he'd learned to swallow his whole life. The courtroom murmured to life. Papers rustled. A gavel sat untouched on the bench. And then a side door opened. The judge stepped in. Jamal didn't even see her face at first, just the robe, the posture, the authority that came with every step. Then he heard her voice. "All rise." Everyone stood, and Jamal's breath caught in his throat. Judge Elena Martinez. His mother. She stepped up to the bench, calm and composed, as if nothing in the world could rattle her. But Jamal knew that look in her eyes. She'd seen something. Maybe she had arrived earlier than he thought. Maybe she'd been watching. Reeves didn't seem to notice. He kept his stance casual, his smirk steady, the pendant still sitting in his pocket like a souvenir. But Jamal noticed the way his mother's gaze shifted toward Reeves, just for a second, then back to the courtroom. She took her seat behind the bench. The court came to order, but Jamal already knew something had changed. The silence in the room wasn't just silence anymore. It was the breath before the reckoning. And Reeves, still smiling, still smug, didn't realize he had just stepped into the one courtroom where he wasn't the one holding the power. Not anymore. The courtroom settled into an uneasy quiet, the kind of silence where no one speaks but everyone knows something's off, something's wrong. Jamal sat at the defendant's table, his hands in his lap, his neck still stinging where the pendant had been yanked away. But it wasn't the pain that stuck with him, it was the look in Reeves's eyes when he took it, that cruel smirk, that quiet assumption that no one was going to stop him. And the worst part? So far, no one had. Reeves now stood beside the prosecution's desk, leaning against it like he belonged there. He still hadn't mentioned the pendant, still hadn't logged it. He just kept it. Jamal could see the faint outline of it in the pocket of Reeves's uniform, the pendant his father wore daily, now sitting inches away from a man who had no idea what it meant, no idea who it belonged to. His mother, Judge Elena Martinez, hadn't looked at him yet, not directly. She was flipping through paperwork, her face neutral, too neutral. Jamal knew that look well. It was the same one she wore when someone in court thought they were above the law, when they made the mistake of thinking her silence meant weakness. But she hadn't said anything yet, hadn't even acknowledged what happened outside those doors. Jamal's fingers twitched. The bailiff began to speak, announcing the docket, Item 14, State vs. Jamal Martinez. Jamal stood. So did his lawyer. Judge Martinez looked up finally. Her eyes settled on Jamal just for a second, and then something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, not a gasp, not a reaction, but subtle. Just the slightest pause in her expression, a flicker of recognition. Then her eyes moved to the man standing next to the prosecution desk. Reeves. Her gaze lingered on him. He didn't notice, or maybe he did but didn't care. He reached into his pocket casually and pulled out the pendant again, Jamal's pendant, dangling it by the chain between two fingers like it was a cheap trinket. The whole courtroom could see it. Reeves held it up, looked it over, and then muttered under his breath to the prosecutor, "Looks like it came from some back alley pawn shop." Jamal's stomach turned. The prosecutor didn't respond. Neither did the judge, not yet. The hearing began, something about dismissing charges based on lack of evidence. His lawyer started to speak. Words blurred together in Jamal's ears. He heard terms like misidentification and overreaction, but he couldn't focus, not with Reeves 3 feet away, still holding the one thing that meant something to him like it was worthless. And no one, not one person, had said a word about it. Jamal looked out at the gallery. People were watching. Some leaned forward with interest, others pretended not to notice anything at all. Some faces looked curious, a few looked concerned, but none of them looked surprised. That was what hit the hardest, they weren't surprised. Because maybe they'd seen this before. Maybe it wasn't new. Maybe the story of a Latino boy getting stripped, literally and figuratively, wasn't news to them. Jamal's jaw tightened. He couldn't stop the heat rising in his face, not just embarrassment. It was more than that. It was that mix of rage and humiliation that makes your hands shake even when you keep them still. That feeling when you're standing in a room full of people, and everyone saw it happen, and nobody did anything. Not yet. Then Reeves spoke, loud, too loud. "Just for the record, Your Honor," he said, stepping forward as if this was his show, "this individual was wearing what appeared to be stolen property when he arrived in the courthouse. I confiscated it as possible evidence." He pulled the pendant up again for everyone to see. Jamal's breath hitched. Roberto, in the back row, shifted forward in his seat, his fingers tightened around the head of his cane. Judge Martinez looked up from her notes. Her face was unreadable. "Confiscated?" she asked. Her tone was calm, but there was something underneath it, something colder. "Yes, ma'am," Reeves said, nodding confidently. "No proof of ownership. He claims it was his father's, but you know, we hear that a lot." He chuckled. No one laughed with him. The judge tilted her head just slightly. "Did he pose a threat to you, Officer Reeves?" Reeves blinked. "No, ma'am. Not directly." "Was he under arrest at the time you took the item?" "No, but did you file a seizure report?" Reeves hesitated. "I was about to." The judge slowly set down her pen. "Were you?" she repeated. Silence. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a second. "Let me be clear," Judge Martinez said. "You took property off a minor in a federal courtroom without a warrant, without probable cause, and without logging it into evidence." Reeves's lips parted, but nothing came out. The gallery was still. The prosecutor cleared his throat, suddenly very interested in the file in front of him. Jamal stood there, heart pounding, watching the storm finally begin to roll in. Judge Martinez looked at Reeves fully now, and when she spoke again, her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "What you did was not procedure. It was humiliation. You stripped that boy of something personal, something sacred, in front of his grandfather, in front of this court, and without cause." Reeves's smirk faltered for the first time. Jamal felt the room shift, like a door opening in a locked house. The judge leaned forward slightly. "And the boy you humiliated," she said, locking eyes with Reeves, "is my son." Gasps echoed around the courtroom. The gallery turned. Some jaws dropped, others just blinked, stunned. Jamal stood taller. Reeves froze. Jamal watched as the color drained from his face, and for the first time that morning, Jamal felt something settle in his chest, not peace, not yet, but the beginning of balance. And Reeves finally understood. He had just picked a fight in the one room where his badge didn't make him untouchable. He just didn't know yet what that mistake was going to cost him. For a few long seconds, nobody moved. Reeves stood there, the pendant still dangling from his hand, frozen in midair, like he couldn't decide whether to drop it, pocket it again, or pretend it had never happened. His mouth opened slightly, as if a response was coming, but nothing came out. It was like his brain hadn't caught up to the reality of what had just been said. Judge Martinez's words still hung in the air, sharp and irreversible. "The boy you humiliated is my son." Jamal didn't move either. He stood completely still, trying to process the moment, trying to steady his heartbeat even though it thundered in his ears. Every eye in the room had turned toward him, some wide with disbelief, others with sudden sympathy, and a few, just a few, with something colder. Like disappointment. Like anger. Not at Reeves, but at him. Like he was the one who'd messed up their illusion of justice working just fine. But none of that mattered, because the truth was out now, and nobody could pretend they hadn't heard it. Reeves slowly turned to look at the judge. The smugness on his face had drained into confusion, then panic, but he still didn't speak. Judge Martinez didn't blink. Her posture hadn't shifted. Her voice hadn't raised. But something about her presence had grown even larger, heavier, like the bench itself had expanded to make room for what she was about to say next. "I watched what happened in that hallway," she said, her voice calm but unmistakably sharp. "I saw the way you approached him, the way you put your hands on him, the way you treated him, not as a citizen, not even as a child, but as a suspect without cause." She paused. "And you didn't even ask his name." Reeves swallowed hard. "Your Honor, I know," she said, holding up a hand. "Don't speak. You've already said enough." The room was still as stone. Jamal felt like he was floating outside his own body. Part of him still didn't believe it was happening. Part of him kept waiting for someone to interrupt, to reset the moment, to pretend this wasn't real. But the silence in that courtroom wasn't breaking, and Reeves? Well, Reeves had finally been yanked out of the comfort of his uniform. Judge Martinez's eyes narrowed just slightly. "You walked into this courtroom with no evidence, no warrant, no authority to seize my son's property. You humiliated him publicly, you violated his rights, and you made a mockery of this courtroom." Reeves's voice finally returned, but it came out thinner than usual. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I didn't know." "You didn't know who he was," Judge Martinez interrupted, "but you did know what he looked like. And that," she said, leaning forward just slightly, "was enough for you." The pendant was still in Reeves's hand. "Return it," she said flatly. Reeves hesitated. Her eyes narrowed. Now he stepped forward like a man walking through a swamp, every movement suddenly heavy. His fingers loosened, and the pendant dropped onto the defense table with a soft metallic clink. It looked so small there, so delicate, and yet in that moment, it felt like the most powerful thing in the room. Jamal didn't move. He couldn't. Not yet. His lawyer gently reached out, sliding the pendant toward him without a word. Judge Martinez took a breath, straightened her spine, and looked directly at Reeves again. "This courtroom is a place for justice, not ego, not power trips, and certainly not racial profiling." There was a murmur in the back. Some folks looked down, others nodded slowly. The gallery wasn't just listening, they were watching. Because this wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was something else now. It was a reckoning. Reeves looked down, but not out of shame, more like he was trying to figure out how to spin the moment in his head. You could see the gears turning behind his eyes. He was searching for a way out, a way to rewrite the narrative. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. Judge Martinez stood. No gavel, no banging, just the simple, silent authority of a woman who'd had enough. "I will be filing a formal complaint against you with the courthouse security department," she said calmly, "and you are hereby banned from participating in any proceedings in this courtroom until a full investigation is complete." Reeves's face flushed. "Your Honor, this is called consequences, Officer Reeves," she said, cutting him off again. "And you're going to feel them, for once." The room went completely still. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a beat. Reeves's eyes flicked around, looking for backup, for anyone who might stand up and defend him. But all he saw were turned faces, neutral stares, people who had just watched the mask slip off a man they'd maybe respected or feared for far too long. He stepped back slowly, but Judge Martinez wasn't done. She turned her attention to the gallery, her voice now for everyone. "This should be a place where every person who walks through those doors is treated with dignity," she said. "My son should not have to endure what so many others have suffered in silence because of people like him," she added, nodding toward Reeves. She looked down at Jamal now, and for a moment, she didn't look like a judge. She looked like his mother. "I'm proud of you," she said, quietly but clearly, for staying calm, for not reacting, even when he gave you every reason to. Jamal finally looked up. Their eyes met, and in that second, All the years of her raising him alone, of telling him to keep his cool, of teaching him how to survive in a world that didn't always see him as a boy but as a threat, all of it sat between them like unspoken truth. He nodded, just once. Then he reached for the pendant and quietly slipped it back around his neck. It didn't shine any brighter than it had an hour ago, but somehow it felt heavier and stronger. Reeves turned, muttering under his breath as he pushed through the courtroom doors, his steps quick and uneven. But Jamal didn't watch him go. He didn't have to. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't the one being forced to walk away in silence. This time, it was the man with the badge. And this time, the silence belonged to him. You could feel it in the room, the shift. It wasn't loud. It didn't come with shouting or chaos. It came with silence. A heavy, loaded silence that told everyone in the courtroom that something was happening, something they couldn't unsee, couldn't ignore, and definitely couldn't walk away from pretending it didn't matter. Jamal sat back down slowly, the pendant now resting against his chest again, right where it belonged. He touched it gently, not for comfort this time, but almost to confirm it was really there. It didn't feel like a victory, not exactly, but it didn't feel like loss either. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he hadn't just been a target, he'd been seen, protected, respected. And across the room, Reeves looked like a man who just realized the spotlight was no longer his. He was still standing by the courtroom door, his posture stiff, his eyes darting back and forth like he was trying to gauge whether he should speak again or just leave. But Judge Martinez didn't give him the choice. "Bailiff," she said without raising her voice, "please escort Officer Reeves to the lobby. Until further notice, his presence here is no longer required or appropriate." The bailiff didn't hesitate. He walked briskly toward Reeves, not aggressive, not hostile, just official, like the process had already begun. Reeves opened his mouth, but before a single word came out, Judge Martinez cut him off with a look. Not anger, not even disgust, just authority. The kind that comes from years of being underestimated and outlasting every attempt to push her aside. "This isn't over," Reeves muttered under his breath as he was led out. Judge Martinez looked down at her papers as if she hadn't even heard him. But she had. Everyone had. Jamal exhaled slowly. His attorney leaned over and whispered, "You good?" He nodded, though he wasn't sure what good felt like right now. All he knew was that the balance had shifted. What Reeves had done, what he thought would be just another routine show of force, was now under scrutiny. Real scrutiny. From the one person in the room who could make sure it didn't just disappear. Judge Martinez adjusted her glasses and continued like a professional, but the air hadn't cleared. If anything, it had gotten heavier. "Before we proceed," she said, her voice calm, "let the record show that the item in question has been returned to its rightful owner, and that no official protocol was followed by the officer who seized it." The court reporter nodded, fingers flying over the keys again. "And let it also be noted," she continued, "that I am recusing myself from any further rulings on this case to avoid conflict of interest. The matter will be reassigned to another judge." Jamal blinked. "What?" She glanced at him just for a moment, her eyes softening. "But I will not recuse myself from what just happened in this courtroom. That is not a matter of family, that is a matter of law." You could hear the shift in her tone now, not emotional, not personal, but sharp. Sharper than steel. She leaned back slightly in her chair, folding her hands together. "I've seen officers like Reeves my entire career," she said, "men who believe their badge is a shield from consequences, who mistake power for immunity, who believe that dignity is theirs to decide who deserves." She looked out across the courtroom. Those men often go unchecked, and because they go unchecked, they grow bolder, louder, more dangerous. But not today. Not here. There was a murmur in the gallery, soft like a ripple in a still pond. Not everyone agreed, but no one dared interrupt. "I will be referring today's events to internal affairs," she said, "and I will personally ensure that every second of that hallway incident is reviewed by the disciplinary board." A pause. "And should the investigation confirm what we all saw here today, I will file a judicial misconduct report directly with the United States Department of Justice." Now it was silent again. Dead silent. The kind that makes your ears ring. Jamal's heart pounded, not out of fear, but disbelief. This was really happening. She was really doing it. Not just for him, but for all the other kids who didn't have a judge for a parent, for all the ones who hadn't been seen, who hadn't been believed. And Reeves, wherever he was standing now, was beginning to feel the heat. His lawyer would be scrambling. His